Solar Subcommittee meeting on May 11th, 2022, starting at 9:36 a.m. Okay. I think that I have functionality here, and then I just need to see if I'm able to get my screen up and share it with you guys. So that way we can go through, and I sent you guys the slides, and so you should be able to kind of follow along if you're able to. You guys have all seen this slide presentation. So we're going to move forward here. The last thing that we talked about, so just kind of as a summary, I'm going to send this out to you guys so you can see, and if anything is incorrect, please let me know. I'll send that out. So that kind of summarizes what we talked about. In the main, we talked about building height and looking at panels and where they're positioned, and how if the panels are below the peak of the roof, then it's likely that, provided the building isn't that much taller than 35 feet, that the panels would not exceed. I think Billy had said that even if the house was taller than 35 feet, flush mounted panels wouldn't exceed. And both he and Whitney agreed on that. And so I think we've kind of concluded with building height, and we are looking at, we didn't really talk about ground mount. I don't know if we need to for building heights. Those are the main heights for the district. For main structures, 35 feet. And then for accessory and detached structures, this is the main feet allowance for accessory structures. I think that's probably fair, that if someone wanted to put up a mount, that it wasn't going to be taller than those heights. Does anyone disagree with that thought?
Hi, this is Karen. I'll turn on my video. So I think that we should allow solar panels to exceed the maximum height, because people can have existing structures that they want to add panels to, and their existing structures could be right at the maximum height. And I see this happening for commercial and residential properties. You know, commercial property, I would think that the owner wants to kind of max out their available business space or industrial space. And so I can see them going to the limit of the building height. Now, I was reading something on Netheads recently. It got into a discussion of solar panels, and one resident said that he had a lot of difficulty, like quite a few years ago, 5+ years ago, when he tried to install solar panels on his house, and the planning commission, it was difficult to get approval because his solar panels were going above tree height. So not even above the maximum building height, but above tree height. And I think, you know, this committee, what my understanding of what we're to do is come up with processes and regulations that would remove barriers for people to do solar installations. So I would be in favor of allowing the panels to exceed the building heights.
So then I would say that we did, you know, when I started this discussion, it was at the Board of Zoning Adjustment. They look at variances. I didn't have a slide presentation for them, but I just kind of roundhouse the topic and let them know that we're looking to achieve Soul Smart designation. We're looking at zoning code elements that would create obstacles. Even just the absence of mention creates an obstacle, and kind of asked them what they thought. And we didn't have a detailed discussion because, again, I didn't have the slide presentation at that time, but I talked to them about it just to suss out whether or not they were interested in solar to go above height without a variance, if that's something they would support. And Billy can speak to this too, but I do believe that the sentiment of the Board of Zoning Adjustment is that they should have variances come to them if it's above the building height, or if there's elements that are pertaining to solar, that there's that tier 3 variance. Now, this could be a suggestion of this committee if people feel that that's appropriate, that the tier 3 variance is wiped out, or maybe it is addressed in a different way, with respect to like specific heights. So if it's over 6 feet or whatever, 6 feet or above. And so I think that's probably the important part of this discussion on heights is what seems fair. 3 feet over the maximum building height. In some districts, should there be a difference between a zoning district that's very large and a zoning district that's very small, so that somebody wouldn't, with their solar panels, block out somebody else's solar? I mean, I think there's kind of a host of considerations with it. I want to support and promote solar, but I don't want to overlook the work of the Board of Zoning Adjustment and any particular consideration. So how do we address that without getting too complicated?
Yeah, I agree.
Ready
I don't
to,
think our goal is to blindly, just take away barriers. And I don't think we need to. I mean, I think quite honestly, I almost feel like we're splitting hairs over something that, like, I mean, again, I said last meeting, how many buildings fall into this category of being over 35 feet, um, pre-existing? I'm going to argue none, or, you can count them on one hand. So it's almost kind of a moot conversation, or just it doesn't amount to much. And any kind of pitched roof with a flush mount, it's going to be inches, probably less than a foot, or it's likely even just going to, like your photo just showed, not even go higher than the eave, than the top of the roof. So it's kind of like not a problem. And if their building is slightly over 35 feet and they're building to the top of the building, then it's it's fine. It is interesting and kind of crazy making that that person was held to the height of the trees. I mean, trees grow, so that's kind of a stupid thing to use, anyways. But that the Plan Commission somehow restricted it based on the height of trees. I think there's nothing about that that's in code anywhere. So I think we definitely want to work to take away barriers, but not to just open it up completely. And also, you're going to meet, this is going to go through the BZA, this is going to go through the PC, and then ultimately it's going to go through the BOT. And I think it's going to get, beat up pretty hard, going through those committees if we take away these kind of, if we just completely take away the building height. I mean, I think that what you're showing now, for sake of accessory buildings and like a ground mount, there's not going to be a ground mount above 20 feet high. I mean, that would just be kind of silly. So I think that's not going to be an issue anyways. And I think for
okay.
some wants to go above 35 feet. I think a variance is reasonable. It just is, because it's
I
going to
mean,
affect their neighbors.
I would say there's probably more than a handful. It's hard to say. I don't know that we've done a survey of how many houses exceed building heights. But I would say there's probably more than a handful. There are some pretty,
Okay.
obviously the older structures in town, as things age, and in Old Town, yeah, they definitely stick out, right? When somebody builds a tall house, because the majority of Old Town is built to 1-story ranch. And a lot of other places, but I mean, it's hard to say, you know, there were zoning issues that created variance requests based on building that was done in the 90s. So like they didn't meet the setback, and the building department pinballed between Boulder County and Nederland between the 90s and 2000s. So
Oh,
at times, like they weren't watching certain things, and you know, someone approved it and it didn't meet the setback for the district. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case with building height too. Um,
okay.
I don't know this story, Karen. I'd love to hear more about it because I was
Yeah.
probably permitting. In fact, I'm sure I did.
So
Or
I will do a screenshot of the messages, and so you can look at it at the
yeah, I'm sure
and
I
I'll
probably know
email
who
that
it
to you.
is. And I
So
can only think that they would have gone to the planning commission if they were asking for something from a land use perspective. If they were just trying to build solar, then they would just come to me and it wouldn't go through the planning commission. So
yeah,
yeah,
I
I'd love
don't
to
know.
read or see more to understand who it might have been.
It sounds like it was the neighbors were concerned about the aesthetics, and you know I'd like you know I I'd like I personally don't think solar panels are ugly, because I know they're
I
purposeful.
agree.
They have a function,
I
and so
agree.
seeing
Yeah,
them
I agree.
peek up over the top of a roof is beautiful. Over the top of trees is kind of beautiful to me. Um, so that's just my perspective. But yeah, I'll send you that right now, Cynthia, in
And
email.
and I think, thanks, Karen. I think this is the kind of thing that we need to consider because while on one hand, I want to say, heck yeah, let's do solar, let's go. And, you know, we can, if it's egregious, we can address it. But if it's within, and you know, when I was doing research initially, I saw that some municipalities will allow extension over the building height. And one thing I want to point out here, something that I added to the slide. So I'm gonna pop ahead here. Um, we're still talking building height, and we were gonna talk lot coverage next. So that may be a juicy discussion. Um, and then we get into setbacks, and the setbacks, because there's a lot to it. I think that's going to be a meeting. But one of the things that I added, one of the slides, a couple slides that I added, this roof mounted elements to exceed height. It's allowed by special review use. So there are things that are allowed by special review
Yeah.
use, extension of a structure, and so, and you know, and they are roof mounted elements, right? I mean, would you rather look at solar or a radio and television tower? But it's in, you know, it's in the code, that those kind of things on a roof may extend above a structure roof line by special review use. So really, there are two ways to achieve it. Is So currently you could go ask for a variance that creates an obstacle. You could make the same case for doing something via SRU that it creates more of an obstacle. Someone has to go ask permission of the planning commission and the board of trustees, or they're making their case before the board of zoning adjustment. So either way, there are some specific considerations. Should solar be added to this? Like, should it be added, allowed, you know, up to 3 feet? Oh, I think I didn't change that text. I gotta fix that, but you know, above the roof line, to this section to make it an SRU, or is that splitting hairs because you could do the same thing by board of zoning adjustment? There's a little bit less process, or I could do more
Does
research.
it seem,
Bill
does
is
it seem,
really busy
does it
right now.
seem, does it seem more like a variance or more like a special review? I mean, what do you think it falls under?
Well, it's a good question, right? Because if you're exceeding building height, there is something, I mean, currently solar is not included in this grouping. It's not. Should it be, is the question that I wanted to ask. We're not there yet because it, you know, this is a later code section, but I just added this. And so this may be a way to consider that building height. But either way, you're talking about a two-step process. So if they had to go get a variance, they're going before the board of zoning adjustment twice. If they're doing it by special reviews, if we suggested that they added solar into this grouping of roof mounted elements, then they'd have to go for special review use. That's another two-stop. It's going to go to the Planning Commission and the Board of Trustees. And so there's not an administrative way for myself or Miranda to approve it as it stands. It's like, it doesn't meet zoning. It's going to go one way or the other, potentially.
I think
Solar is in this.
you know, knowing that it's going to go through the BZA and the PC and even the BOT, I think personally it's going to end up they're going to want, and maybe I'm wrong on the BOT, Karen, you have a better sense of me, but they're going to want some kind of like extra something for things to go above the 35 feet or whatever, way above the roof line, whatever it is. And what I would say is, you know, maybe just knowing that that's how it's going to get beat up, we pick the easier one for the homeowner as our way of making it, taking some of the barriers out of the way. We try to pick the easier of the two. So we're kind of trying to please everyone with it. Because I mean, one thing we don't want to do is, I mean, even on the Planning Commission, someone talked to me the other day about, you know, his personal thoughts about it, which are pretty anti-solar. I was kind of shocked, but we don't want to create more ill will than there's, you know, ridiculously there already is about solar. So I think if we can put some kind of variance on it, but make it the lesser of the two, that might be the happy medium. And just for those few things, I mean, in general, I want people, you know, I don't want people to have to do anything except put the solar on. But I think when it goes above the 35 feet or way above the house line, you know, if it's above 35 feet, let's just pick the lesser, because I think it's going to end up having to go through something once it goes through those next few committees. So we should try to create something that's going to work versus just get destroyed by those committees.
Here are the similarities. So both processes would require them to go before, like in one process with the variance, you're going before one board at two different meetings. And at the planning or with a special review use, if this were to be added to this chunk of text here, we'd have to make a code amendment to change this section, include solar, and it would go before the Planning Commission and the Board of Trustees. With both of them, whatever document came out of that would be recorded with the county. The variance would run like a covenant with the property. So either way, there would be documents in their property file saying, hey, this thing happened. The difference would be the variance would be a case by case. So it'd be very explicit to that case and whatnot. And even though if it were added to the special reviews, it would still be case by case, but it would be a little bit broader than a specific variance in a sense. And it may be that the board would decide this is an obstacle for solar. We don't like that idea of making them go through a special review use. You know, we don't want to add it. We don't want to add solar to this chunk of text in 1660 because we don't want to create that obligation. You know, my hope would be that eventually they would see that we'd either figure out a certain amount of text to say you can go over 3 feet or 4 feet. And I can do more research about that to see like solar building heights. I think that was a discussion up at the last meeting. I had written down that Karen said she would do that. And she said, I said all those words, but I didn't say I was going to do it.
I said, I asked you if you would do it, Cynthia.
Yeah. I don't,
Yes.
I mean, I think like 3 feet, quite honestly, is probably, I mean, like when you said 6 feet earlier, like that would just be a ridiculously crazy, you know, structure to even waste your money on. Like, I think 3 feet is, I mean, you know, probably Whitney and yeah, doing some research with the real solar companies, but I imagine 3 feet is more than enough if we want to put a allowance in there. I guess I'm just also saying, I don't think it's going to go through those other committees. If we just, even if we tag on 3 feet, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that's,
I saw some variety.
my sense being on both of those, the board and the commission, is those aren't going to, we aren't just going to move smoothly through those groups.
I agree. I think that that there are folks on the planning commission who are going to want to adhere to the zoning that's established. So we definitely saw that in some of the discussions already, that there was pushback about heights and glare and some other things that, you know, some people aren't willing to just say, yeah, let's do the solar thing. And so I think it's good to be mindful that this, what we suggest will be changed by the Planning Commission and Board of Trustees and based on how they review. And this is helpful to have Karen here as former Planning Commission and now Board of Trustees, because she has the power at the Board of Trustees level to make that suggestion of saying, you know, I think that we should limit the obstructions. And if we make someone go through a variance, that's going to create an obstruction. So it may be easier to create a code type language that says anything under 3 feet or 4 feet. I saw anything from 5 feet and under when I did some cursory research. So, you know, something that seems reasonable and that's not going to antagonize the neighbors. I don't want to get too terribly complicated of percentages in different districts, and you know, that's
Yeah.
pretty challenging for an applicant.
Yeah.
And so I, you know, probably if we're going to say the option is either they're going to have to get a variance if they're above, and that's not going to be every single person in the town, that's going to be 20, who knows, or we include a code bit that gives a limit for their ability to go above, that's explicit to solar, whether it's added in something like this, but this seems like this is going to send them down to another process, but I just wanted to ask the question. Or you know, anything under 4 feet, something like that. Is that going to be egregious? And then I think Karen at the Planning Commission will be able to kind of drive the nail in there of saying, you know, I don't, you know, my feeling is that they shouldn't have to create more obstacles for folks and that we should be more supportive of solar. I do think there are going to be people on the Planning Commission, probably
Yeah, I mean,
more
I'll,
so.
I'll be there
Please.
too, and I think, I mean, I don't agree with it personally, so I would be one of those who has a hard time with it. But I think I'm in the majority with that and the Planning Commission and probably the BZA, and I'm not sure about the BOT. But I think to like have this thing go out our subcommittee one way, to get reconstructed twice, you know, by the board, by the BZA, and then by the PC, and then go to BOT and have them reconstruct it. We should be trying to create something that's going to move through smoothly. Because again, we don't want to. I mean, there are people that don't want solar, so we want this to, you know, when it goes into those other committees, there's going to be public involved too, more public involvement. We want to create a policy that sows goodwill with solar too, I think.
The part of the process with variance requests or special reviews, but the part of the process that sometimes the neighbors like is that they get a letter, they get notified. Something's coming up, something's in your area, it's within 300 feet of you, you're on alert now, here's a meeting, we're going to talk about this proposal. And so there are folks on the Planning Commission who like that. They like that case by case review. Let's look at the specific criteria of what you're asking for and what you need, and allow the public to weigh in. So I would say in most cases, most people would either go through the solar app where they're, you know, if they're able to, once we get solar app installed, and work with that program where they can enter in all their own information for the permit, and it's kind of on the applicant more so than on me, which is great because then they could log in and see their process and everything else. So that's something we'll be working on. And for those that wouldn't be able to do solar app because of criteria of the weight of the roof or the structure of the roof or certain other conditions, older houses, they would go through the regular building process. If there was something that needed a variance, then it could go down that track, and that would allow that case by case review. So I just want to be clear that I don't want to create more obstacles, but I don't want to overlook what Billy is saying. And there is validity to what he's saying. is that, you know, the Board of Zoning Adjustment did feel like it should not be wiped away, that they should have to go through review if they're going to a tier 3 variance, if they're going to exceed the building height or backs and those kind of things, or um, the planning commission. And so I think there's validity to what Billy is saying about, you know, it's going to go through the board, and taking the work out of the board zoning adjustment, they barely meet. They may not like that. And I think the planning commission, if we just kind of green light it, we're going to definitely have people on the planning commission who are going to think, no,
Yeah.
So I didn't see the chat here. So I mean, I want to find a measured, kind of a measured approach to this so that, so that we can, you know, we can, some of this, so that we can, so that these boards can understand that we really looked at these issues and had a critical eye to it and tried to find avenues for folks who couldn't just meet it and make it easy. But not everyone in Nederland is going to be slotted in the same direction. That's just the way that buildings are and districts are and everything else. So this may be a point of contention on the commission. You know,
So
between
Cynthia, I
Karen.
posted
Yes, ma'am.
the messages from Facebook netheads about the Eric Johnson who had difficulty installing solar. That was in 2011. So he said the town was worried about going 4 inches on his roof would make it too tall, breaking tree line at top of Sunnyside.
I see. 2011. Yeah, 2 years before I started.
Aha. So
Not under my watch.
That is crazy. I don't blame him being frustrated.
So it could be
Very
that his
frustrated.
building height is 35 feet.
It could be.
So
I mean, there are definitely buildings in Sunnyside. I know of one that is definitely above the building height.
So, yeah, and
Say
Whitney
there's probably some in Big Springs.
was on my side with having the height above the maximum limit as a use by right for solar. But she wanted to put it within a range, like under 3 feet or 5 feet or something like that. I don't know.
Right, right. And I think, I mean, that's kind of what I've seen. It would definitely pend more research to see what other municipalities are doing. But when I did cursory research, that's what I saw. Is that some are just like, hey, you've got to go through a process. Others are, they allow that solar and they promote it that way, that you can go this many feet above. And so when I'm looking at building plans, I'm asking them, if it's not shown on the building plans, what's the building height? Generally, if, you know, they're a tight organization, they're going to have all of that listed. So it's really easy for me to see, you know, are they below or above the height? But sometimes I do have to ask. And then obviously there is something, there's a piece of this that we don't have representation as part of this subcommittee, but I think it would be good. And unfortunately, Marshal Rick Hendrickson is leaving us and his duties are going to be taken over. He's kind of retiring, and I think he's maybe going to do some at the planning or at the fire station, but he's not going to be continuing ad nauseum. And so I think some of his duties are going to be picked up by Mike Scott. And I would only say, as much as I want to promote solar and find a mechanism that is less obstacle laden and less, a lot of applicants feel very fearful when they have to go through these processes. So that's a lot what I'm talking to people about is, here's the process, here's what you need. It can feel very burdensome to applicants. They've got to come up with a million things. It's going to cost them. There's a process. Their fate is put into other people's hands. And so I like the idea of a below this many feet, and then it gives a path. And if you are just really exceeding the building height, you can go get a variance.
Can I ask Billy a question? Billy,
Yeah.
could you speak to the folks in the community that are, quote, against solar?
It blows me away, but I mean, didn't you haven't like heard that more or less said, in the planning commission. Like,
I
I mean,
have
I think
not.
people are for it,
Who are
you know,
they? Who
Theoretically,
are
no,
these
no,
people?
no, no, not going there. That's not fair. They don't
Ask
need to
who?
express that themselves. But well, I mean, it's fair for you to ask. It wouldn't be fair for me to answer. Um, for their sake.
good
I mean,
idea.
it surprises me that people are against it. And I'm like you. I think they're beautiful. I wish we had wind towers. Like I think they're beautiful too. But it's just that people I think are all for solar in theory, but there's that NIMBY thing. Where and they don't want to look at it, or they don't want to obstruct their view or shade. I mean, a lot of it's more theory than reality. Glare, I think that's kind of a bit of a reach too. Perfectly, to be perfectly honest, but. I just think there are people that are really against. There's people that are all. There's three guys who ran for BOT who are all about like raising the building height. Like what's going to solve world hunger. But like, I think there's a lot of people that are also against raising the building height, and so that's one thing I tell you that's going to be a bone of contention with boards, commissions, BOT, and the
So,
public. And so I
so
just
I,
think why set ourselves up for it? And then also,
yeah.
I think the people. I mean, I know it's surprising, but people just seem to have a bit of a chip on their shoulder. If the solar, I mean, the fact that the planning commission was talking about it going above a tree line, that just tells you it right there. And
Oh, it's in the chat. Look in the chat because I'm not sure it was Planning Commission. So I think what you're referring to is when this presentation was made to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission talked about glare and setbacks and height and but but I I haven't gotten the feeling from the community, from the public, that they wouldn't want to go above the height with solar panels.
I think the major. Well, yeah, how many have you actually asked that
I
in the
haven't.
public?
I
I guess
haven't.
I would
No.
ask you.
So it's
Um,
just a feeling.
so
You should ask
they
when you're
want
walking
solar,
around,
but
Karen.
did we ask them specifically? Oh, do you mind if we go 50 feet high with solar? I think you get a very different response.
Yeah.
But I think I mean I know that someone just the other day at a planning commission meeting kind of caught me off guard. He basically said, I'm going to write you a letter about what I think about the solar, but which seems a little inappropriate since it's going to the planning commission later anyways. But like this this person was like doesn't believe in ground mount should even be allowed. I was just like,
Interesting.
whoa, that's crazy. Like I don't agree. I just didn't say anything, but I was just like, I disagree.
Yeah.
But it's definitely more of a NIMBY. NIMBY, everyone's all for it until it's next door.
So I
And
think
I
that
think
there was a lot more control in the past with the planning commission. And part of the reason why we're having this discussion in 2022 is because things were done in a certain way for a very long time. And they kind of didn't stray off of that path and look at those kind of things. And so, yeah, there definitely is a NIMBY sentiment that I think is important to consider, not to create more obstacles for folks who want solar, but to understand the resistance that there will there will be. And so, for example, that building height and glare was mentioned at the planning commission meeting. Karen, you were there, Billy, you were there. And one of the things that was mentioned about glare is that folks on the north side would be radiating their glare to those on the south side. I think that's a transitory thing, that it would
Mhm.
be pictorially glaring, but kind of, at a certain point, and you had made a similar comment, Billy, about, well, I'll have to walk around Old Town and see if I'm really noticing a lot of glare at different times of the day to notice if that's just really obnoxious. And it may be, if somebody's sitting on a hillside looking across at another house, maybe that glare, they find it obnoxious.
Well, it's
Um,
seasonal, but you can't account for those 2000, those, all those hours of all those days of the whole year. I mean, you're going to get glare every once in a while, and then you're not most of the time. And yeah, I just think to try to like the glare argument to me is just it's to me seems like someone who just wants to stifle solar. Quite honestly.
I think that we acknowledge there's a lot of a strong vocal constituency in Nederland, and people have a lot of opinions. We're not going to be able to make everyone happy, as we know. And so I think if we can find some mechanisms to address this by allowing within a certain above height for solar, that's maybe a separate section of the code that allows by 3 feet, but they have to absolutely show their height on their building plans. And whatever it is, 3-4 feet, whatever it may be, and that there's a mechanism to continue to go and ask for a variance should that be required for somebody who's, say, 40 feet tall and they're really above, and adding 4 feet is going to really, really make it tall. Generally those bigger houses are on bigger lots, and they're a bit more, they're not as obnoxious as maybe something like that would be in Old Town, but I do think it's worth figuring out mechanisms to make it easy and also to allow an out that's needed. And I think if we wipe that out away, that's going to affect the Board of Zoning adjustment, and there'll be people on the Planning Commission who might not support that. So I think if we, what do you think, Erica and Larry?
Well, I think we're having a great discussion. I really appreciate it. And I think it's important to take residents' perspectives in mind. But I as you guys are talking, I keep going back to the fact that like people deserve the right to make their own energy. And that's part of the indicated solutions to climate change that have been outlined in the IPCC over and over and over again. And rooftop solar is a slam dunk as far as an opportunity to offset your home footprint. So, what we keep going back to is like, let's reduce the barriers. So I agree that we need to have something, right? So if it's like 5 feet above the height restrictions for building in Nederland, it strikes this variance need and going through a special review process. That sounds appropriate, but I don't think we can really cater to this NIMBY mentality. I don't think solar glare should have any space in the conversation anymore. We don't tell people they can't build a home because it's ugly, right? And so I think if somebody has a greenhouse gas footprint, they deserve the right to offset that in these models that we have available to us. And I don't think, like we talked about last meeting, you're not gonna build solar on the apex of your roof, right? Typically it's gonna be lower than that. But I think, this conversation of, trying to outlaw ground mounts, absolutely not appropriate.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I'm not saying we should just create some weak policy that, completely caters to NIMBY. I'm just telling you that we need to find somewhere that moves through the process quickly and doesn't just throw all the boundaries away. And I think it'll appease those folks. People are still going to be pissed on some level, but I mean, I agree. We need ground mounts, and I think that'll fly through ultimately all 3 committees. But we we probably just, I think what Cynthia's saying, like, just if we just hand it to the BZA and the PC, like, yeah, we're basically getting rid of all these, zoning restrictions. It's not going to happen.
The other thing to think about is that with the building codes, the last conversation, which I wasn't that directly involved in, there was a discussion about requiring square foot of homes over a certain size to have to be net zero. And it's not that hard to do. That's just installing solar. And if you already have a home that's 4,000 square feet, that's going to be a drop in the bucket as far as the total cost. And that's going to help Nederland in lots of ways, achieving its goals, including all of the other impacts we're going to see from climate change. But I wonder if there's a way to think about more of where are we going to be like 10, 20 years from now, and think backwards instead of this controversial topics around solar now. I mean, really, these people, it's going to be a non-issue very soon. Solar is one of the key solutions to that the IPCC has indicated, and specifically rooftop solar. So I don't know if, I just think the NIMBY stuff, like, absolutely, like, we hear you, it's important, but there's so many other things you can't control that your neighbors are doing. I think being able to control their energy and a solution to climate change just really shouldn't be part of the conversation.
Agreed.
mean, I
And most
think
people
that
can put in a huge array and not even go above the apex. I mean, that's the reality is most people don't need to go to the top of their pitched roof or, above the
just,
top of their pitched roof.
and just to kind of follow on what Billy's saying, I think everyone on this committee is very supportive of solar and wants
Yeah.
to see more of it. I mean, if I had a neighbor who was a solar farm, I would be overjoyed. Not everyone
Same.
feels that way. And so I think it is important to recognize that, yes, this thing will be shaped by voices who are not in support of solar as well. And they will weigh in and have their certain feelings stated. I think that catering to NIMBYism is a lot of the reason why we've got to where we are with a lack of affordable housing in past years and other things. And so I do think that there is political will that is really needed of what kind of town is Nederland wanting to be. Are you wanting to control everything through zoning? Are you wanting to promote the fact that people can obtain solar easily? And so I think that if we find a mechanism to allow the majority of solar to go through easily enough, have an option, a code option where there's an out in case they need it for the handful of exceptions that would exist in the town. And if they are just really egregious, then there's a mechanism to go through with a variance.
That sounds great, Cynthia. I would like to propose.
What do you think about that?
Oh, I would like to propose
Yes.
instead of NIMBY, Kirby, which is carbon reduction in my backyard. So, just saying, throwing it out there.
Yeah. Well, the
Carbon
new thing is
reduction in my
embodied carbon,
backyard.
and
I love it.
that's the real problem.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that what do you think about that, Karen Blakemore? Do you think that I know that that goes against kind of your feelings, but does that seem like a workable option? If we could hear from you, we are down to the last almost 10 minutes, so I'd love to hear what Larry thinks as well.
I like Kirby. Kirby sounds great.
I think that's great.
So I'm sorry, I'm baking bread. I've been like walking around and I had to like change the temperature and open the oven and all that. So I didn't hear
Your
exactly
solar
what-
oven.
Yeah. It's gas. However, whenever that oven fails, it's going to be electric. And because right now
Induction.
I'm getting all of my electric energy from my solar panels plus more. Plus I have a credit that I have, so I can have more electric appliances. So I didn't hear, but I think what you said was we were going to make use by right within certain limits. Is that what you said?
The intention, I mean, I'd like to do some more research and see what other towns do, to see if that's kind of a mechanism that we could present to the Planning Commission and Board of Trustees. This is a mechanism that's seen in other municipalities that allows, and granted, we're a unique municipality, right? Because in many of those places you're looking at Superior and North Glen, they don't have the sort of features that we do with the mountains and whatnot. Directly, but I think if there are paths to move, so most everyone is going to move in this path and they're just going to green light, then some people are going to have to potentially be under what could be a code allowance to say, hey, if you're under 4 feet, you're good to go. And if you're 5 feet and above, anything over 4 feet, you're going for a variance.
Yeah.
And that way it doesn't completely upset things, but it allows a mechanism for potentially the handful that wouldn't comply.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a fair way to go about it.
I like that idea. I think maybe we look at flush mount versus flat rooftop with the non-flush mounted panels and come up with a reasonable range of use by right. And I like our committee. I mean, I think the public's going to weigh in on these other meetings with the Planning Commission and with the Board of Trustees. And then we'll actually hear directly from the public. So I prefer to make our decision based on what feels right, moving forward to reduce our carbon emissions.
Okay, so when the feedback does come in from public during the process, then we will hear more rather than sort of supposing there are concerns. Because, you know, we've heard concerns at the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Adjustment and by neighbors. I hear that kind of stuff all the time. But I do think that that's valid to get real feedback from folks and not sort of tremble in the potential of it, knowing that it'll potentially come. So we didn't talk about impervious surface yet for lot coverage. Do we feel like that we have concluded building height piece? Larry, did you want to throw any thoughts in on that?
I liked everything that Billy said. I'm concerned that anything that we propose could sail through other boards' missions easily. Billy brought that up, and I think that's something to keep in mind. If we put something out to them and they turn around and change it or negate it, we're back to square one, and that won't feel so good. So I think it'd be smart to think ahead and figure out what's pragmatic and will actually get through. I love everything Erica said and everything Karen said also, but I'm just trying to think practical about what we can actually get through easily and move on. So I'll stop with that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So I think, you know, we can bring this kind of discussion up with Whitney. And if Wolfie Wolf and Edna are going to for the next meeting, we can bring up the discussion on building heights and see what everyone else feels in a group. I feel pretty good with this option. And, you know, it definitely allows paths, the easy path, the more challenging path, and, you know, much more challenging path. So, and I think for something, you know, with a variance, it's so individual. So they would be looking at the specific criteria of how tall is your building and what are you asking to go above? And then the neighbors can weigh in and everything else. But I do think it's important to consider that. I mean, obviously there are going to be changes made to what we suggest through that process with the Planning Commission, through Board of Trustees, any other boards that we go to with this. But I think to not end up with a completely changed thing that we don't even recognize the work that we put in, I think it would be great if we didn't have to go through that, because this is a labor of love trying to think about the future. So thank you for echoing that piece. That's really important, Erica. I think that's so important. And thanks, Larry, for your comments. So we will recircle wagons on the building heights with the group at the next meeting. And then we can start talking about lot coverage. And lot coverage is that impervious surface that you can see from this drawing here. The coverage, they would have had the vehicle use area, they have it like concreted or asphalt, garage, storage area, building. So impervious surface is any structure, concrete or asphalt that is going to keep the water from hitting the ground.
How
So
do you guys deal with it
changes,
if you did a paver driveway? How is that treated with pavers?
it depends on what the materials are, but if there's a perviousness to it, then potentially, I mean, if it's seen as a pervious type of material, then it wouldn't count. But if it's concrete or asphalt, then it absolutely counts. And so,
But you know what I mean by pavers, like a 2 foot by 1 foot rectangular piece of whatever.
right, and then they have the lines that go in, so the
And
water
there's
would
breaks between it.
yeah, it would feed itself into those cracks rather than having to run across the
That's how
concrete.
solar panels will be.
Yeah. And so I think this next discussion that we'll have will be important because in some places people are well above their maximum lot coverage for the district. They can't add a garage, they can't add a shed because they're already built out. And there are going to be some people who feel like it does contribute to lot coverage as was mentioned at the Planning Commission when they talked about, well, ground mount can attract drifts. It will change, the wind patterns change around it and it'll drift up. That could affect vision clearance, those kind of things. So kind of a cascading issues that could happen. Whereas I feel like the water runs off the panels onto the ground.
Yeah.
So as there's not a ton of concrete underneath the ground mount,
No.
if it's like a little, enough of a footer to not knock it down, but it's not covering the entire area where the panels cover, then I wouldn't see it as impervious surface. There may be people who do. And so I think that this will be part of what we discuss in the next meeting. We will circle wagons on building height with the rest of the group and then get into maximum lot coverage. And if we have time, we might start talking setbacks, but we'll see. Take a look at the slides. That's kind of moving us through the direction of the code elements that we're talking about to address. So should solar be exempt from lot coverage? Any caveats by size or type of system, or perhaps what's underneath it? And all done in the sense of don't create more barriers. Let's make things smoother, but not overlook any concerns from a planning perspective that should be considered. So,
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say one thing, I'm in the energy efficiency and green building kind of world, and like LEED certification, National Green Building Standard, Enterprise Green, all those things that take into account not just the building, but the whole built part of your property and where you put it, et cetera. They actually incentivize things like pavers. Either you do a fully permeable gravel type of drive or walkways where water can just go straight through, or pavers are also an option where it's a like some kind of rectangular square bunch of things that makes up your driveway, but all that water percolates around those cracks and it gets through and kind of makes just makes its way down into the ground. And I believe solar panels very much fall into that category. I know this is going to be heated debate, but I'm going to argue hard that a solar panel allows water to roll off it, pass through. If there's wind that builds up, it's just going to be snow that melts down later and percolates into the ground. It's not it's not creating you're not going to have a stormwater runoff problem in the neighborhood or in the street next door because of your solar panels. I mean, that's kind of silly, and that's more what the lot coverage thing also is about.
Right, and I mean that might be something to consider when you think about a solar farm. But if they go through special review use on a case-by-case basis anyway, that's something that the Planning Commission and Board of Trustees can discuss. I agree with you. I don't think that it contributes to lot coverage. I think similar to a roof, it runs off. And if you haven't covered the whole ground beneath the panels with impervious surface, then it's going to run off and you can plant some flowers underneath it and find a creative way to reuse that water. So that's what's on the agenda for next week. Are there any questions as we wrap this meeting up? Not next week, 2 weeks from now.
That was my question. Yeah. Thanks.
No questions? Any thoughts?
This was great. I learned a lot and I'm very thankful.
Awesome.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Karen, is there any way you could send me those comments? I can, well, let's see, I can look at them here. Screen.
They're in chat.
I got you. Okay. Great.
Yeah, Eric Johnson, I think he's a reliable source there. So I trust what he's saying is correct.
I agree. And to Erica's last comment, the idea that agrovoltaic arrays have been found to reduce the need for irrigation by up to 20%. I think that's a really valid counterpoint to make, in, leverage of saying, hey, this doesn't create impervious surface. In fact, when you're using it in that fashion, the agrovoltaics will require less water. So that actually supports the water conservation we're trying to do. So I think that's really, really awesome. All right, guys,
Cynthia,
I will.
add one thing real
Yes.
quick. The Boulder County link that I sent in the chat, they talk about if there is something above the height restriction, that it has to be looked at by an engineer and part of their solar permitting process. I'm sure there's more to that somewhere, but I thought that might just be helpful to see kind of where it is in that checklist for them. So it looks
Great.
that was created a while ago. I also was doing some research in Louisville, but I haven't found specific height language at this point.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely one of the, when we looked at the different considerations for the best management practice, that's how I made these slides, was looking at, you know, what do they suggest Nederland needs to do to go more pro solar, and what are the code aspects in the zoning chapter that are pertinent that would need to be changed, considered, etc. And so I think that's really good stuff. Thanks for sending that link. I appreciate it. And you guys are awesome. I hope you have a fantastic Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone. You too, Cynthia.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks, you
Cynthia.
guys.
Thank you.
Take care. Oh, by the way, if you go to Crosscut and spend money between 3 and 6:30 on Thursday, some of that money goes to the Nederland Elementary PTA.
That's awesome. Thank you for that.
I think all the money, actually. Yeah.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.